All right. So we're gonna, this class is racial equality, government, and the Constitution, right? This is a class that's offered within the Pan-African Studies Department. So the subject matter at hand, by and large, are African people. And for me, anytime we deal or engage this conversation of African people, I like to disturb the normative understanding of the African experience that likes to situate the apex or the start of the African experience within the institution of enslavement, right? So common schooling, common educational practices within this country and within most countries by and large is to start off African history within the confines of enslavement. We don't do that here within the Pan-African Studies Department. We trace the ontology deeper into really the real origins of the African history. So that's what we'll get into a little bit today. This notion of ontology. Again, ontology is just a philosophical word that helps one to understand how they know who they are, right? So we're going to kind of go into this notion of African ontology. We'll be dealing with the concept of the diaspora. Is anybody heard of or anybody familiar with the term the diaspora? Be the African diaspora, it could be the Asian diaspora, it could be the European diaspora. Okay, so essentially, if we're dealing in this context with the African diaspora, right? So anyone with African descent that is displaced outside of Africa makes up the African diaspora, right? So what we call African Americans, or what I would call Africans in America, are part of the African diaspora. Brazil has the second largest population of African people outside of Africa. Those individuals make up the African diaspora, right? Africans who are found in Asia make up the diaspora. Africans in the Caribbean make up the diaspora. Africans in Europe make up the diaspora. So this is the concept of diaspora. And the same could be true when looking at Asian cultures, European cultures, or what I would call on this land, indigenous cultures, right? So what we refer to as the Native Americans, I refer to as the indigenous people or the rightful owners of this land, right? They have a diaspora as well. So we'll be getting to this conversation of diaspora implicitly within the lecture. Let me share my screen and then we'll jump into the slides. Oh, another thing, I'm not going to be able to see you guys. So if you do have questions, don't hesitate to just interrupt me and I'll address those questions. I will leave time to kind of for discussion, but some things may be pressing. You want to kind of get it off your chest in the moment. And I'm fine with that too. All right. So again, dealing with the idea of the diaspora, I kind of broke that down for you guys a little bit. And really, we're answering the question, who are African people and what makes up the African historical experience? So one thing with me, I'm really big on theoretical frameworks. This course's first theoretical framework. It's derived from the chair of the Pan-African Studies Department, my mentor, Dr. Nana Lawson Bush. And he has cultivated this framework this theory called African American Male Theory, AAMT. I expand the theory to include all African people, right? So African American throughout the diaspora, African women as well. I make it more of an inclusive theory. So what the theory states and what the framework is, African American boys, men, women, etc., are resilient and resistant. African American male theory posits that African American boys, women, men are born with an innate desire for self-determination and with an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence, right? So that's what's really important. That's the framework, that African people are born with an innate desire for self-determination and with an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence, right? So coming out of the womb, African people have a desire for self-determination and they're blessed with an unlimited capacity to be moral and to be intelligent, right? So think about some of the stereotypes the Western world kind of projects on African people, right? They're lazy. That's the antithesis of self-determination, right? They are criminals, right? So that's the antithesis of being moral, right? They are intellectually inferior. That's the antithesis of being innately intelligent, right? So this theory turns a lot of the African stereotypes on its head. So this is the framework that this lecture will be delivered through an African-American male theory framework. So as you'll figure out about me as we get through the semester, I'm really not big on the Bible or big on Christianity per se. But I do believe that there are some truths found in there if you know how to read them correctly, right? And so the image at the top, the passage at the top is taken from Genesis. Let us make man or women in our image after our likeness, right? And so what that details is God is going to make what we understand as human beings in the image of God, right? Hence making it in your likeness, right? So for those who have children, your children look like you, right? They are created in your likeness, right? So this is what the passage from Genesis is saying. So when God created human beings, he created them to reflect his image or her image, if you believe God is a woman. So this is just an image depicting God shaping and forming the first beings on the planet, which are African people. So scientifically, historically, anthropologically, the first human remains have been found in Africa. They call it Abiomi. Some have referred it to Lucy, but in reality, Abiomi, which you see in front of you, predates Lucy, and we'll get into that a little bit in the next slide. So Lucy could be traced back 3.2 million years. That is located in the region of Ethiopia. Older bones, and I need to update this lecture, trace back those ancestors 8 million years old, and that's Abiomi, who you saw in the first slide. So by and large, African people can be traced back 8 million years old, okay? The modern human, what we understand as Homo sapien, they could be traced back 200,000 years old, and that was more located in East Africa. New information and new research shown that it could be traced back to 340,000 years in the region of Cameroon, which is more centralized in Africa. First, Africans leave Africa in large numbers around 60,000 years ago. And then the first modern European arrived on the scene about 30,000 years ago. So there's a vast difference between the 8 million years that Africans occupied the planet and the 30,000 years that the European comes on the scene, but we have been tricked into only learning European history. So not only are we doing a disservice by not learning other cultures, we're served the disservice of not learning complete world history. So this is a more of a physical representation of the information that we just covered. Again, the slide says 7 million years, but again, it goes back 8 million years, so be attentive to that. So that's the first humans being found on the planet out of Africa, being traced back 8 million years ago. The modern human, what we know as Homo sapiens, being traced back 300,000 years ago, which is still in Africa. Large movement outside of Africa could be traced back 60,000 years. And the first European arriving on the planet could be dated back 30,000 years. So I want to pause real quick and kind of engage with you guys for a moment. So if we are to take the information delivered in the first slide, gleaning the information from the Bible, which says, God created man and woman in his or her own image, right? And the first people that walk this planet are African people. Where's the correlation between those two realities? And if I need to rephrase the question, let me know to make it more clear for you. So again, if the Bible—
Can you rephrase it, please?
Yeah. So for those who believe in the Bible, or for those who want to just take this from a theoretical practice, it says that God made man or women in his or her image, right? So again, I gave you the example of your children. If you guys have children, or if you can even look, Jeremy is on to something. Or sorry, why don't you speak on what you just put in the chat? Because I think you're dancing around what I'm talking about.
So like the Western idea of the Bible is usually based off of God being a white man. and Jesus also being white for whatever reason. So if we were to base it off of what you were saying, which is true, that God would be like black, or if you believe that, God would be black.
If we are to use this theory, right, or if you were to use the Bible, or even historical accounts, right? If we're going to make them in our likeness, the first people who walked the planet were African people. So we have to assume that the features, if God were to have a physical feature, it would look African, right? Which we find is interesting. And as we continue on in the lecture, African people never talk about the image of God. They never describe God's image, right? That is something that comes along more so with the advent of what we call modernity. And modernity is just when Europe began to conquer and colonize the world. That's the invitation or the creation of modernity, right? So once modernity takes place and Europe begins to colonize and conquer, now the look and the image of God becomes of importance and becomes of concern. I cannot give you a year, but if you look up the Council of Nicaea, that is when the Catholic Church and I forget his name, Constantine, he taps one of the great painters of the time. Excuse me, I'm spacing on the names right now, but I want to say Michelangelo. I could be wrong, but essentially what they do is they decide to take one of these great painters of the time, and they're using his uncle to paint and to get this image of Jesus that you see now, right? So that is when the image of God becomes white, right? During the Council of Nicaea, under the guide of Constantine, who starts off the Crusades, which is going to say, we're going to spread this idea of Christianity and the cross throughout the world, right? So, and that's where you see the image of God being proliferated and put in front of everybody's face as the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man that we have become familiar with, right? So again, when we're talking about ontology, right, we're understanding that there's a divine closeness between the creator, right? And in African spiritual traditions, we'll call him Abu Tala, the one who creates and brings life into the world, right? And African people. Any other questions, comments, or concerns before we jump back into lecture? Or if somebody doesn't agree with that, that's okay too. Does anyone have varying opinions, varying creation stories? I'm open to hearing. No, all right. So we'll jump back to the slides. All right. So again, that's just a physical representation of the information I just covered. So now we'll get into some individuals prior to European contact. Actually, before I do that, we didn't talk about that, did we? Nah. So I put in the chat, I don't know if you guys got that, something to kind of start thinking about, a mental exercise. Who could name for me an individual prior to European contact and what makes them significant or of importance? Again, this is prior to European invasion into Africa, right? This is prior to Africans and Europeans intermixing and mingling. Who can name me an African individual prior to European contact, and what are some of their significant contributions? And feel free just to unmute yourself and shout it out.
It's prior to contact, but I know that the word algebra comes from, I'm forgetting the, like, I'm forgetting how to pronounce it, but it derives from an African word. I think it was that was done, like algebra was invented in, I believe, Africa. Mm-hmm. Or what we take, or how we perceive mathematics isn't a European creation. It came elsewhere and it was adopted because of its efficiency. Yeah. I think it was a Muslim man, if I remember correctly, and he named it like algebra or something similar. I'm forgetting the exact term.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that predates that.
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that the whole science of math, it does stem out of Africa. In fact, it was as a byproduct of African women, right, who arrived the science of how to count their menstrual cycles. And there was a stick that they used to do the 7-day count, right? So the whole science of mathematics derives out of Africa, and we'll get into that a little bit later. You mentioned the Arab influence. We'll get into that as well as we go into the lecture, and that kind of goes with the Moors. And you think about the influence of Islam into Africa and the convolution between Africa and Islam, right? One, as the Europeans begin to invade and the Arabs begin to invade Africa, they begin to mix and mingle, right? And languages begin to mix and mingle. So a lot of Arabic words begin to mix with African words. And you'll see that, again, we'll get into this a little bit deeper in the lecture. So, so somebody mentioned Cleopatra. Yes, but her dynasty was after the invitation, the invasion of Europeans, right? So she wouldn't predate European contact. And I see somebody mention the movie. Please don't mention the movie because that's historically inaccurate. Cleopatra for sure didn't look like that. But we'll get into that a little bit in the conversation either. But to get back to the exercise, right? It's a reason that you guys don't know any African individuals prior to European contact. One is due because when we are taught African history, we're only taught the experience of enslavement, right? And two, there's a Eurocentric hegemony when it comes to education, right? We're only gonna focus on the exploration, the great events that took place in Europe and are done by Europeans, right? So that speaks to the reason why you guys don't know any individuals prior to European contact. Don't feel bad. I've been on conferences out of the state, and these are conferences for African studies, for people who engage in the process of African thought and African studies. They don't know how to answer that question, right? So this speaks to more so a systemic issue when it comes to how we learn about different cultures and different people, okay? Any comments, any questions? All right, so we'll jump back to the slides. So one of these individuals prior to European contact is this brother here. He is Narmer. A little bit of information about Narmer. Was an ancient Kemetic pharaoh. And when I say Kemet, I just mean ancient Egypt, right? This is what Egypt was called prior to European invasion. So prior to the Greeks and the Romans invading Europe, it was referred to as Kemet. The definition or the epistemology of Kemet literally means black land or land of the blacks, right? You think about the root word of chemistry, it stems from chem, which is black, which is the study of blackness. So Narmer was an ancient Kemetic pharaoh of the early dynastic period. Some consider him the unifier of Kemet and the founder of the first dynasty, therefore the first pharaoh of unified Kemet. Now, the unification becomes important because Kemet was split in upper and lower Kemet, and Narmer was able to bring it into one nation state. Another individual is Imhotep, and this is a look at Imhotep here. Is anybody, real quick, keep jumping back and forth, but I can't see you guys, so kind of fucks with me. But is anybody like medical students in here? Anybody studying medicine, nursing, anything like that? No? Anybody know anybody who's studied medicine or been in doctors? So there's this.
My dad's an EMT.
Okay.
My mom's a nurse.
Okay. So are you guys familiar with the Hippocratic Oath?
Yes.
So can you guys speak to that a little bit, Alexis?
If I'm correct, sorry, my dog's in the background. If I'm correct, the Hippocratic Oath is the oath that they take when they first start an internship or when they first start becoming a doctor, nurse, EMT, etc., that they cannot discriminate or keep or stop helping someone based on race, religion, gender identity, or any of that.
Yeah, they must be moral in their medical practice, essentially was what the Hippocratic Oath is desiring. Do you know who the Hippocratic Oath is named after? Anybody heard of Hippocrates? Janet, what do you know about Hippocrates? I saw you nodding your head.
All I know is that he's some sort of philosopher, but I don't really delve into like what he does. I just know the name and possibly a few words that derive from his name.
Anybody want to help Janet out? So Hippocrates is recognized as the father of medicine, right? So we're going to get into we're going to problematize this notion of him being the father of medicine. So we're dealing with Imhotep. Imhotep was the world's first multi-genius, the world's first architect, first physician, first engineer. He built the first pyramids and the architect of the step pyramids in Kemet. He also is recognized as a priest, a sage, a poet, a scribe, and an astrologer. As a physician, he diagnosed and treated over 200 diseases, 15 diseases of the abdomen, 11 of the bladder, 10 of the rectum, 29 of the eyes, and 18 of the skin, nails, and tongue. He also performed surgeries and practiced some dentistry. All of this occurred 2,200 years before the Western father of medicine, Hippocrates, was born, right? So not before he started practicing medicine, not before he did his first surgery, but before he was even born, right? About 100 years after his death, he was elevated to a medical demigod and later into a full god some 2,000 years after his death. He was also worshipped by the early Christians as either the first Christ or as one with Christ, and that's Imhotep. So if Imhotep did all these things 2,200 years before Hippocrates was even born, how is Hippocrates the father of medicine? It sounds like hypocrisy to me. Moving on, we're looking at Akhenaten and his mother, Queen T, or Queen Tigra is how you would say her full name. Akhenaten is was a pharaoh in the 18th dynasty of Kemet. He ruled for 17 years, making his transition in about 1336 BCE or 1334 BCE. He's especially noted for abandoning traditional Kemetic polytheism and introducing the worship centered on Aten. Now, polytheism is just the worship of many gods, right? So the belief that God could be in the sun, God could be in the trees, God could be in the plants, right? There's various forms of God. So Akhenaten shifted Kemet away from that belief system into a monotheistic belief system, and Aten was the one who worshiped. So when we talk about monotheism, think about Christianity. There's only one God in Christianity. Think about Islam. There's only one God in Islam. Think about Buddhism. There's only one God in Buddhism, right? All of those are monotheistic religions. All those religions could thank Akhenaten for their inception. Akhenaten lived at the peak of Kemet's imperial glory. Kemet had never been richer, more powerful, or more secure than under the reign of Akhenaten. This brother here, King Taharqa. It's clear from historical accounts that Taharqa was one of the greatest ancient Kemetic pharaohs. Taharqa was described by the ancient Greek historian Strabo as having advanced as far as Europe and even as far as the Pillars of Hercules in Spain. This feat alone would count him among the greatest military tacticians of the ancient world. So he was able to advance his empire from Africa into Europe and into Spain. Later, Spanish legendary chronicles also identified Tarco as a general of an Ethiopian army, supposedly campaigning in Spain in the 7th century BCE before him becoming pharaoh. This event has also been held in account for the name of the Spanish city of Tarco, now Tarragona. So they have a city in Spain named after Taharqa, right? But they call it Tarco, and that's what they called him when he traveled into Spain. There's also biblical depictions of Taharqa, Isaiah 37, 8-9, and 2 Kings 19, 8-9. This brother here is Mansa Musa. So right now, I believe Jeff Bezos was passed by Elon Musk as the richest man on the planet. If you were to put Elon Musk's wealth and put Jeff Bezos' wealth together, they would not have shit on the wealth of Mansa Musa. So Mansa Musa, Musa the First, commonly referred to as Mansa Musa, was the 10th Mansa, which translates to King of Kings. Musa embarked upon a large building program raising mosques and schools and colleges. Most famously, the ancient center of learning, the University of Sankore, was constructed during his reign. At the height of his power, Mali had at least 400 cities. So Mansa Musa amassed a wealth of over $400 billion, right? Legend has it, when he would travel, he would carry so much gold with him in his caravan that it would spill over. And when the gold spilled over, it would shift the economy of the cities that he traveled through, right? So that would be like, he's on the 10 freeway headed west. As he's traveling, some gold falls off of his caravan in Alhambra. And now because of so much gold that is dropped off in Alhambra or spilled off in Alhambra, the whole economy of Alhambra shifts because of people are grabbing the gold that Mansa Musa left behind. So that's how much wealth this brother had. And again, still to this day, no one has been able to accumulate the amount of wealth that he had. So this kind of goes into our conversation about Islam and the Arabic influence, or the Arabic relation in a glissant notion. The Moors, right? The Moors are individuals from, more specifically, the area that we know as Morocco, but as they traveled into Europe, anybody who was Black was referred to as a Moor, just like at a certain time, anybody who was Black was referred to as an Ethiopian, right? So they do derive from the North African area, but as they travel outside of Africa, it becomes a universal term for all people with dark skin, for all people coming out of Africa. But for those familiar with European history, this idea of the European Dark Ages, where Europe was, had several plagues, had famine, diseases were running rampant. The Moors were successful in bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages. Reason being, they introduced the science of bathing to Europe, right? So before the Moors went into Europe, they didn't know how to properly bathe. The Moors taught them how to use water and wash their ass, how to change your clothes based on the seasons, right? So if it's hot, you want to wear lighter clothes. If it's cold, you want to wear warmer clothes that'll keep you warm, right? The Moors brought the science of dressing for the seasons into Europe. How to use plumbing, how to use water to kind of take the disposable waste and the shit that you leave and keep it out of your dwelling spaces. That's something that the Moors brought to Europe. The science of how to season your food is another thing that the Moors brought to Europe, right? So again, this idea of bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages was largely responsible and largely due to the innovations of the Moorish technology. And so, go ahead.
Professor, I had a question.
Sure.
I know there's like somewhere in Spain, there's like a palace or just like a place that's called like the Alhambra in Spain. Does that have like any correlation?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
What we're talking about?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you from from evidential standpoint, but I do know there's a whole bunch of Moorish influences all throughout Spain. For example, any of the archways that you see that are arches in Spain, that's a Moorish influence. So if you were to look at your door right now, the door is squared, right? Moors had the science of making those archways like that, right? So that's something that's a Moorish influence. There's several things that you will find if you really look into Spanish museums in Spain and Europe that have a lot of Moorish artifacts. But as far as Alhambra and that correlation, I'm really not sure. That's a good question. I'll have to look into that. Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
No worries. All right, we'll jump back into the slides. So noticing that the slides and the lectures are really male-centered. And really the reason being is this was originally cultivated for a rites of passage program that I do in San Bernardino in Los Angeles, which is really designed around teaching young Black men from 13 to 17 a knowledge of self. But for this conversation, I like to be more equally gendered balanced. So I included this portion here of some women prior to European contact and their great contribution. So on your upper left-hand corner of the screen, the sister with like the falcon on her head, that's Hatshepsut. She was one of the ancient queens of the Kemetic period, and she was a full-fledged queen. She was a warrior queen. She defended several dynasties in Kemet. Below her is Ma'at. Now, this is not an individual. This is more of a deity, more of a principle. We will be reading Ma'at in the next couple of weeks. And this is the principle that structured Kemetic society, right? So when we talk about in our society, we have the Constitution. In ancient Kemetic society, they dealt with Ma'at, and she represented truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, and propriety, right? And you see the feather on her head. And what's significant about that feather is when you made your transition and you're going into the afterlife, and you had to go before what we call Judgment Day in the Christian tradition. In the Kemetic tradition, you would go before Ma'at, and you would have to state the 42 confessions of Ma'at. And if you were able to state those 42 confessions and you were able to do it without lying, your heart will be placed on a scale with a feather. And if you're able to state your 42 confessions without folly, without lying, without fronting, then your heart would be as light as a feather, and you'd be able to successfully move to the afterlife. If you're not able to do so, then your heart would be heavier than the feather, and then that's when you would not be able to successfully transition to the afterlife. In the middle, we have Queen Makeda out of Ethiopia. She is the matriarch to the tribe of David. Next to her on the upper right-hand corner, that is a depiction of Queen T, who was the mother of Akhenaten. You can't see the full image, but what that is a statue in front of a temple. And what's significant about this is the dimension of this depiction of Queen T is the exact same size as her husband, who is the king, right? And the reason why they did that is to show the equality between men and women, right? Women in the Kemetic society could reign and have just as much power as men, and it wouldn't be second guess their power or their place or their ruler, their ability to rule, right? So just it depicts the equality within men and women within that society. On the bottom is Yaya Santiwa out of Ghana. She has the legacy of the golden stool. When the British tried to colonize the Gold Coast, or what we know now as Ghana, a Khan society was centered around this stool, and whoever sat on the stool ran the society. And as the Britain came in and tried to colonize Ghana and try to take hold of that stool, Yaya Santiwa fought them off for at least, I want to say at least 60 some odd years. She was able to kind of keep the British out of Ghana. All right. So here's a look at a map of Africa prior to European contact. And here are some of the nation states of Africa, again, prior to European contact. You see Kush there, which was a large empire. Directly north of Kush is Kemet. And then you see some of the other areas. So if you look on the west coast of Africa towards the bottom of this hook here, you see the Akan. Those are the people who are out of the area of Ghana that I mentioned, Yaya Santiwa. All right. And here are just some images of some of the temples in Kemet. And this gives you great insight to their educational system. So on your bottom right here, you see those pillars. And you probably can't see on the pillars, there's like inscriptions, right? Now, those inscriptions will be used to teach the science of astrology and the science of mathematics. So in everything in Kemetic culture served two purposes. One was to be aesthetically pleasing, to be beautiful, and the other was to be a source of pedagogy or a source of learning, right? So these pillars not only served as beautiful constructions and architecture, but they were used to teach the students in the Kemetic universities how to analyze and navigate the stars and how to understand math and science. So this is a picture of the 3 pyramids. If you pay attention, you can see that they're directly aligned with some stars in the solar system that attach to Orion's belt. On your bottom right here, that's a capstone of one of the pyramids. And in the next slide, we'll get a little bit more detailed information from Ashura Kwesi about just the scientific brilliance and genius of the Kemetic people.
Restore what? Now you can see all 3 pyramids.
Oh, I'm gonna fault y'all. Hold on, let me go back. I'm trying to read the chat. Looking at.
Restore what? Now you can see all 3 pyramids. Now, in the further back is the pyramid of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors had astronomical science, astrology, where they studied the stars and so forth. One of the things that's been brought to astronomers' attention is that they noticed that the pyramid of Khufu and Khafra, if you notice right here, are in a perfect alignment. Okay? It's a perfect alignment. But the question is that why would such a perfect alignment and perfect structure where they built the small pyramid of Menkaure off course? Can you see it off course? Yeah. But what they found, though, is that our ancestors were building the pyramids in alignment with the stars, that they were in rhythm with the astrology and the astronomical science of the universe, science of astrology or the study of the stars. And what they found is that the star system Orion was the star system of Osiris. Remember, the king wants to become one with Osiris. So by aligning the pyramid of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure with Orion, and that's why they built the pyramid of Menkaure slightly over and not in alignment, because the pyramids were built off the alignment of the star system Orion. The star system Ceres was Isis. So our ancestors, in essence, were building heaven on earth. They were taking the science of the stars and building the pyramids exactly as they saw the heavenly body or the cosmological universe. Figure out why Menkaure's pyramid was not in a perfect alignment, but it fits with the alignment of the star system Orion. As well as the other pyramid layout, it fits into the constellation that our ancestors saw of Osiris. And that is the constellation of the man that we have today as a figure of a man. So you can take and put the star system Orion right over the pyramid of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure and see why they had the alignment of Menkaure slightly over, because it fit with the star system Orion, because the purpose was for the soul to ascend into heaven, for the spirit to ascend into heaven, to become one with Osiris. And the star system Orion was connected with Osiris. Keep in mind that the star system Orion was aligned perfectly with the chambers of the pyramids that we're going to deal with later on in our lecture series when we get into it. So this is serious knowledge to show you how profound our ancestors saw that they were building and with the constellation of the universe. Tomorrow when you go into Saqqara, you're also going to see the pyramid of Unas, showing the first concept of ascension into heaven. Long before there was Christianity, long before there were little white angels with wings under, that we get a concept that we're going to go to heaven. Unas already had the concept of ascension into heaven, or a spirit going into heaven, known as astrotheology. So this is what our ancestors saw, the soul becoming one with the great god Osiris in the constellation of Orion, which was the symbol for Osiris. And the star system Ceres was for Isis. Powerful astronomical knowledge that our ancestors had, showing how in tune our ancestors were with the heavenly bodies. In essence, building heaven on earth. Even in the Hermetic text, it speaks of Asar is our father in heaven. And he looked down on his kingdom that he built. Oh, just before. So let me show you something here This is the kingdom. This is a star in Orion's belt now. See a star in Orion's belt looking down on his kingdom? In Amos in the Bible, it speaks of, seek of him who is of the star, the 7 stars of Orion. Now, let me lay something on you. Our Father, which art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is where it all is. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that was a SAR, and come back here to do serious field educational work. So when someone tells you about the pyramids, you can really break it down. Break it down to our Father which art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Right here, this is where it started. That was taken from the Hermetic text of your ancestors long before the Ptolemies got the Jews to write the Bible, and the first European Bible was written right here in Egypt. And it was Ptolemy Philadelphus who got them to write for them, which they copied it from the pyramid text of our African ancestors. So now, can we validate this? Oh, yes. We're going to validate this even further when we get inside of the museum in just a little while. And okay, brothers and sisters, as we talked about the pyramids and the capstone, this is a capstone of the king Amenhotep the third of the 12th dynastic period. These capstones were put on top of the pyramids. This capstone right here is from Hawawa. It's a capstone of Amenhotep III, as he was called Ni-Ma'at-Ra Amenhotep III, and that's his name here, Subet Ni-Ma'at-Ra, given life for eternity. And what you see here are the all-seeing eyes of Asar and Ra-Harakte, or the wings representing the rising spirit, the Sahu spirit. Remember, Asar, who was the great king, as I said, an Orion's belt represented Asar. He was what? Our Father, which art in heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Where would we find the Orion at? Can we validate this? Can we validate with even a man by the name of Robert Bouvel, who many Egyptologists smashed down when he tried to say that Asar represented Orion's belt and Orion represented Sahu. That was the spiritual star for us to go to. Well, we can find it. Hold this for me. I want to show you something. Have patience here. This is very small. So where is this symbol at of Asar and Orion? Where is this symbol at? Well, let's go right over here and look closely. And what symbol do you see right here? What symbol do you see right there? You see Orion, you see Asar right there. Right. That validate that this capstone validates it on this capstone right here. Ni-Ma'at-Ra, this was of the 12th dynastic period. Over 4,000 years ago, this came from right here.
All right, so that kind of gives us a more detailed analysis of that connection between the astrology and the architecture of the ancient Kemetics. So moving forward, right, the question are, who are the ancient Kemetics? There's a lot of debate about that. Cecilia mentioned the movie Cleopatra, right? And I said that's historically inaccurate. And this is a depiction of how the Kemetics themselves seen themselves, right? So figure A is a Kemetic, the Egyptian, as it says there, the Kemetic seen by himself, a black type, right? B represents the Indo-European. Again, that would be your Greeks, your Romans, etc. C are the other blacks in Africa, right? So those who would migrate into Kemet from outside of Kemet, but still within Africa. And then D is the Semite. So those are the people who are mixing with Africans, right? Or those who came from the Middle East. So again, they were very aware of, different phenotypes, but the originators, the people who built the pyramid, the people who set up this cultural system, who built up this spiritual system, they were in fact African people. Over time, the area becomes invaded and it becomes lightened up, right? And now you see more of an Arabic influence in Egypt, and really the Black presence has been effaced, has been erased from Egypt. So another thing that is important to take account of, right? So as Kemet is being invaded and Kemet is being taken over, the people who lived in Kemet are fleeing west, and they're taking with them their knowledge, their science, their architecture, their astrology, right? And if you keep in mind the map of Africa, you had where Kemet was in the northeast of Africa. You had Mali was more towards the central west part of Africa. And we mentioned with Mansa Musa, the University of Sankar, and also within that, this University of Timbuktu, right, where the Universities of Learning. Those are extensions of the knowledge production systems that took place in Kemet. Because of the invasion, as I mentioned, they fled west and they took this information with them. And they did the same thing, and they had the same cultural institutions that they had in Kemet, but they just established them further west, right? So that's why you see the University of Sankar. That's why you see Timbuktu. What's interesting about Timbuktu, books was the currency of Timbuktu, right? So as like for us, we have your ATM card, you got Apple Pay, you got cash. Nah, they didn't deal with none of that. Your value was books, right? So if you wanted to get something, you would have to trade me a book to be able to get your food, to be able to stay in the hotel, et cetera, et cetera. So that speaks to the value that they placed on intellectualism, right? The books was the highest valued material in that society. And here goes a picture of the Songhai Empire, Mali, and then Timbuktu. And again, you notice that's on the western part of Africa. So this knowledge, this information, and these individuals, they made their way west. So again, we know how the Kemetics had a supreme insight in astrology, and they were able to analyze the stars. In the video that we watched, he mentioned Sirius A, a star Sirius A, right? This is images of the Dogon tribe. They're in West Africa in that Mali region. What makes them famous was their ability before modern technology to see the Sirius A star with their naked eye, right? So they weren't using telescopes or anything of that nature. They were able to literally sit on a rock, put their hand over their eye in a circle form, and be able to see this Sirius A star. And again, even today, modern science are not able to see that star without technology and telescopes and things of that nature. So again, it shows you the connection to the stars that these African individuals had, and also the transferring of information from the eastern part of Africa all the way through the western part of Africa. All right. So we'll stop sharing. That is the last lecture that we'll go through this semester. Let me kind of look at the great proof of the intelligence of ancient Africa. Absolutely. Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback on Cecilia's point, right? The proof of the intelligence of African people is in the pyramids. So one thing when you talk about conquering and you talk about colonization, if you cannot devalue or destroy evidence of a people's greatness, you co-opt it as your own, right? Hence, Cecilia's point of Cleopatra being white in the movie, right? So we cannot say that ancient Kemetic history wasn't brilliant. So we'll just say we did it, right? Is anybody familiar with the terminology 21 gun salute? No military families in here? So when someone from the military or someone from, I think it's strictly military, I don't know if the police do it or not, but when they die, at the funeral, they do the 21 gun salute. So they'll shoot in the air 21 times, right? Do you guys know Napoleon Bonaparte, the French conqueror? Napoleonic complex, okay. So the correlation between 21 gun salute and Napoleon. Does everyone, if I say the Sphinx, do you guys know what I'm referring to? Okay, so the original name for the Sphinx is the Haram Akhet. Give me a quick second, I'm gonna pull up a picture, kind of make it more clear for you guys. Let's see. So real quick, just to kind of give you an idea. So you guys see this image here of the Sphinx, right? It's a man's head on a lion's body. But I want you to pay attention to the face. What do you guys notice about the face?
He doesn't have a nose.
Doesn't have a nose. Okay. So this is where the 21 gun salute and Napoleon intersect. So Napoleon was tasked to excavate information out of Kemet, out of Egypt. When he arrived on the scene, he seen the magnificence of the Haram Akhet. It blew his mind. It fucked him up so much that he told his men with the cannons to point at the face of the Sphinx and shoot 21 times, hence 21 gun salute, removing the nose and the lips of the Sphinx. Why would he do that?
To take away the black features of the statues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So he got to the Sphinx, he said, shit, he looked black as fuck. 21 gun salute, shoot off the nose, shoot off them lips. So that way we can't show evidence of the Africanity of this great society, right? Because at this time, this is under modernity, right? Modernity is in the process of taking place. And to do this effectively, we need to erase all presence of African greatness, because we cannot justify enslaving a people who built pyramids. You cannot justify enslaving a pyramid of people who were the founders of civilization, right? So we need to devalue their legacy to justify our oppression of them. So again, if you can't destroy a culture, you can't devalue a culture, then you'll make it your own, right? So they couldn't completely wipe away all the evidence that they found. So then they'll go the process of co-opting this information and calling it ours. Yeah, so I feel like I've been talking a lot. I want to hear from you guys. There's a lot of information that you process. There is no wrong answer, but I just want to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions. More specifically, if anybody disagrees, I would love to hear that too, right? This is part of academic process, discourse. Not everyone doesn't have to have the same opinion. That's what you would call intellectual masturbation, right? We should have different ways of looking at things. So we'll open up for conversation.
I want to say something, well, because from a lot of books and articles I read about the history, I feel that before the industrial revolution, there are so many, civilizations in the world, more than one, in a lot of, planet, not a continent, but the industrial revolution brought by the Europeans actually create a contemporary civilization, and they want to replace that so they want to so they want to replace it with that new contemporary civilization they created. Mm-hmm. So that's why we see that a lot of people are confusing. I feel that the people in the world, in every corner, in Asia, in Africa, in South America, the people are confusing because they have the older history than what we have right now,
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Cecilia. And then coupled with that, right? You guys know what hegemony is? Or if I say hegemony, does anybody need me to explain hegemony? So hegemony is the process of making information normative, right? But that information only is going to situate one segment of the population, right? So our education system is hegemonic to where you only learn European information, right? So we have a European hegemony within our education system. These systems are not localized or centralized, they're global, right? So to Cecilia's point, that's why whether you go to Asia, you go to Africa, you go to South America, there's all operating on the same sense of confusion as it pertains to world history, right? Because if we go back to the Council of Nicaea, and you go back to Constantine and what his mission was to spread Christianity throughout the world, right? It was not just to get Europe or just to get Africa. They made that a world phenomenon. So everywhere they went, they brought that confusion with them. So that's why there's so varying of different opinions. But also to Cecilia's point, what I heard in there implicitly, right? Outside of this Western context, especially in the US, they do tap into older history, right? So they have more of a nuanced look at history and look at the world because they, they're not as brainwashed because they're not in the center of the beast, right? So they have access to other information. And what's really interesting, a lot of, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, if you were to go to Europe and really do some deep diving and go into the archives, you'll find a lot of this history because when they did their plundering, they took it back and held it in their museums. So like the Vatican, the bottom of the Vatican is filled with this information that I just went through in this lecture, right? With the actual archival material, right? A lot of the museums, the Louvre and all those things, right? Those are filled with ancient African epistemologies and knowledge productions and artifacts and materials. And to me, as far as getting it back, right? When you talk about reparations and you have these conversations around reparations, that must be included in this conversation of reparations, right? That's part of this process of atonement. Other comments, other questions, other concerns? So the way that this class is going to work, or that will make the class work, is y'all got to talk back. Again, this is the last time that I'll be lecturing. So what's really the thrust of this course is going to be your ideas, your input. So no one has no thoughts about all the information we just covered. We went about 18 slides and y'all just blank.
I mean, I guess from my standpoint, it goes back to an old saying, history is written by the conqueror. You won a battle, you won a war. So what do? You erase the past. You write your past. This is the history because it's my history. It's what I want history to be. Yeah. That's why a lot of different cultures you see throughout, not just Africa, but throughout the world after humans dispersed, and colonized different continents, you see the same system. You see the same tendencies to occur in every single one of those cultures. The invader wipes clean the past. That's why when you look at Latin American culture, a lot of our artifacts, a lot of the wealth was melted down. It was destroyed. It was completely wiped off because you want to erase that. You want to erase that history. The same thing you see in the Americas, in the North Americas. What do? You see massive destruction of all historical past. Like the people in North America, the original colonizers of North America, the indigenous people, they had societies, they had cities. People think that they were all just nomadic people. They weren't. They had actual cities, they had structures. Those were completely destroyed. Those were completely wiped off. And you look at every other culture, you look even in Asia, they tried their best to wipe it clean of what they could, but over there they had also massive structures. You see what persists are these massive architectural structures that just to destroy them would be an undertaking in themselves. Yeah. You cannot destroy the pyramids. Yeah. They're massive structures. Yeah. You cannot destroy the Great Wall. It's a massive structure. You look at cities like in Latin America, those pyramids, they're so big, they dwarf you. Yeah. You can't get rid of it. The best thing you can do is try and erase what it was before, rewrite what it was.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Daniel. You gave us a great academic depiction of what took place. So for me, I like to kind of oscillate between both realms, right? Like we got the academic and I could do that all day, but then there's also street shit, right? So from a street translation, if we get in a fight, we got beef and I catch your ass on the street, you out of bounds, we fight, I'm going through your pockets, right? And whatever's in them pockets becomes mine. Whatever shoes you got on your feet, run them too, that's mine. You got a nice little watch on your wrist, run that too, that's mine, right? So To the victors goes the spoils. And that's what Daniel articulated magnificently, right? Kind of paying attention to the chat here. We got a quote from the Count of Monte Cristo. Yep, if you survive, you're able to tell that story. And then just the need to expand our knowledge and not just focus on what's available and just the desire to dive deeper. We have an echo to that sentiment. And then, you know, to piggyback on what Daniel was saying, the illegality behind destroying those structures. But, you know, and I think to problematize Jana's point a little bit, right? Like let's bring this conversation to a more contemporary analysis. 45 initiated legislation that says it's illegal to destroy federal property, right? And y'all know, when I say 45, y'all know what I'm talking about, right? The previous president, the orange motherfucker, right? So he makes this legislation that says it's illegal to destroy federal documents. Now, think about what was going on when he signed that legislation into place. Think about what happened during this past summer, right? Speak to me. Tell me. So, what was happening during that time? What was really prevalent this past summer?
Trump.
You had the Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
You had a lot of protests. You had a lot of people coming out opposed to this idea. And there was also the wave of getting rid of this symbolism that was still in place of like the South Confederacy, this idea of it, the symbolism attached with it. And he saw that people were pushing to get rid of the symbols of oppression.
Yeah.
And he was against it because no. I don't want to lose my symbolism. I put the symbolism in place. I want it to stay there. So it's illegal to get rid of it. It's illegal to damage it.
Right. So let's
alert from calendar. Amiri Manzili Zoom meeting.
All right, y'all need to hear all that. So let's fast forward a little bit from the point that we're talking about of the summer, and then we'll go into January 6th, right? So what happens? Everyone storms a federal building. They're snatching podiums, they're stealing computers, right? But who are these people who are storming the Capitol? They're his supporters, right? So the very law that he puts in place, his own support system is undermining that law, right? So now what's interesting to pay attention to, how will those perpetrators that stormed the Capitol be impacted by the law that Trump signed? Or excuse me, the orange motherfucker. How will that intersect, right? Or would they be able to navigate around that law that he put into place because of what their ideology is or what their positionality is, right? So you see even the hypocrisy in these laws, such as the protecting of historical monuments, right? It's only to protect certain type of monuments, only to serve a certain type of people, or to criminalize a certain type of people, right? So when we're thinking about government,
Sorry, I was gonna say, I know some people got arrested, but I don't know if anything further is gonna happen with that. And I know there wasn't that many, because I know that there was a very big amount of people, but it was a very small amount, just people that got caught, you know. So, and it reminded me of when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening, and then a small amount of people got in trouble for hitting all these businesses and stuff like that. So it just kind of I thought of it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And just from what I've been paying attention to, I know the dude with the Viking horns, if y'all know what I'm talking about. So he's a vegan, right? And the meals that they serve in prison aren't vegan. So his mom writes a long ass letter saying that he's being further oppressed because they're not adhering to his vegan diet, and they release him to his mom, right? Don't take my word for it, look it up. You can see if I'm bullshitting. But now I know I'm vegan too, but I can bet you my last dollar, let my mom write a letter, I'm gonna be right the fucking jail still. And they're gonna tell me to eat what they gave me, right? So again, it's this hypocrisy as to who has to adhere to what laws, right? I'm going to send you guys an article about one individual who was not offered bail for his participation in the activities on January 6th. I'll post that to the Google Classroom site, and I'll also email that out. So we're running close on time. Is there any last comments that you guys want to make?
You know, it's crazy. I don't know if anyone lives in Whittier, California, but there was actually a councilwoman named Jessica Martinez that went to go storm the Capitol, and everyone was trying to like get her like off the council, but I don't know if any actual moves were made for her.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of police officers are being found out that they were storming the Capitol. A lot of military individuals are being found out that they're storming the Capitol. So we'll see how this all unfolds.
I believe there was like a woman from the Air Force, right? Correct. That I think she died.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know in the week
from the Air Force.
I know in the week leading up to the inauguration, when they had like the National Guard and everybody out in DC, that they had to remove the National Guards by like the tens because they were found out to be a part of racial terrorist groups.
Yeah. And to me, with this shows and what nobody's talking about, right? This issue, it didn't begin with the orange motherfucker, and it's not going to end with him leaving, right? This is a deep-seated issue that's embedded in all the institutions of this country, right? And one thing that the COVID phenomenon brought to the forefront is, somebody put it like this, and I think it's a brilliant way to put it. The biggest threat to the Black man is the police officer, right? The biggest threat to the Black woman is the healthcare worker. Y'all follow me on that? The biggest threat to the Black man is the police officer. The biggest threat to the Black woman is the healthcare worker, right? So think about studies that are being shown to where they don't believe that Black women are experiencing the amount of pain that they're experiencing. For one example, Serena Williams, right? A blood clot in pregnancy is deadly. Right? You would literally die if you catch a blood clot during pregnancy. She's an athlete, right? Greatest tennis player ever. So you think she knows her body. During her pregnancy, she's telling them like, yo, I think I'm getting a blood clot. No, you're fine. No, you're fine. No, you're fine, right? It wasn't until she had to lose her shit and go off on them that they actually addressed her blood clot, right? So she almost died just because they would not listen to what she's saying. So the biggest threat to the Black man is the police officer. The biggest threat to the Black woman is the healthcare worker.
I just wanted to say something real quick. I know there's a lot of stuff that like goes on behind closed doors with like that sort of thing kind of happening. And I remember reading like a crazy statistic where it was like just a high amount of like people that don't get treated the same as like a white individual. And I don't remember the statistic like off the top of my head, but I just remember thinking about it and seeing it and thinking like, that's like the craziest thing I've ever read.
The birth mortality rates, right? Infant mortality rates are extremely high for Black people. Even how COVID has impacted certain communities, right? So all throughout the globe, Africa, the Caribbean, their numbers for COVID-19 were very low. It was to the point when it first started, Black folks were joking like, yo, we immune to this shit. Like, we ain't even gonna get it, right? But once it touched here, Black people were the highest population to receive it and to die from the COVID-19, right? That's not something innately wrong with Black people. That speaks to the inefficiencies of the healthcare system for addressing a certain segment of the population, right?
Or even now, how there's the vaccine chasers, and it's mainly white people going to mainly Black and Mexican areas. I have a friend who lives in Watts, and she decided one day she was going to go with her sisters to see maybe if they could possibly get a vaccine. And the line was out the door for people that didn't have appointments. And maybe all of them were white, maybe a handful of them weren't. And I think that goes to show that the Black and, well, just like the POC population in general, we're the working class, whereas the white people have the option to go do these things when they're also the same people that denied the virus in the first place.
And I think too, you're absolutely right, Alexis. But like, let's be really meticulous in our terminology here, because it's a lot of white working class people who are still being marginalized from access to these certain things, right? And we'll end it here. White supremacy is a pyramid system, right? And it's a very small, myopic positionality that fits within the ideal white supremacy framework, right? 1, you have to be a man. 2, you have to be heterosexual. 3, you have to be supremely wealthy, and you typically have to be somewhere Christian, right? So that's the ideal white supremacist from a paradigm of white supremacy. So if you're a woman, you fall 1 notch outside of that paradigm. If you are LGBTQ, you fall 1 way out of that paradigm. If you're poor, you find 1 realm out of that paradigm, right? So even the way that white supremacy operates and orientates itself, it negatively impacts even white people, right? And James Baldwin does a very good job of articulating that reality. For the sake of time, we'll end here. Again, I'll be sending you guys out emails tomorrow, letting you know what group you're in. Group A will meet on Tuesdays. Group B will meet on Thursdays. Our first reading will be the Isa Hilliard book, The Teaching of Ptah-hotep. Teaching of Ptah-hotep, the oldest book in the world. I will email that out with you, with the Group A and Group B on tomorrow, but it's also on your Google Classroom site. But on your Google Classroom site, it's 2 separate files, okay? So it's PDF 1, PDF 2, Hilliard, The Teaching of Ptah-hotep, read both of those. But I'll, again, email those out to you. All right, you guys, have a good weekend. Be safe, be well, get some sun, drink some water. If y'all into vitamins, take them shits because we're still in a pandemic. And I will see y'all on Tuesday or Thursday. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Later,
Have a
Professor.
good
All right.
Thank you.